95. Right now we'll go to the Farm Bureau phone line. Check out favorites.com and go with the home team, Mississippi Farm Bureau. We're joined by Keith Carter, Athletics Director at Ole Miss. And the last couple of times that we've talked, we've got a whole lot of questions, not a ton of answers. Do you feel like you're getting to the point, and this is really general, where answers are starting to finally present themselves?
I do. I think it's still very fluid and evolving every day. But I do think, obviously with the President's and Chancellor's decision last week that we can bring student athletes back on June 8th, I mean, that was huge. And, Shannon Singletary and our folks here have been working tirelessly on that plan to be ready for that. And I think we are. And so, we'll start bringing them back on June 1st and doing some testing to prepare for that June 8th day. But, it does feel like every day there's starting to be a little more clarity. We've always had questions about, how would our state open up relative to other states and what the footprint of the SEC look like and all of that. And we're starting to see some of the states open back up and open back up for business. So I do think that there's more answers now. But I think the problem, Richard, is you answer some of the questions and then new ones pop up. Obviously, we're getting student athletes back. We're excited about potentially, getting them ready for the fall season. But then if we have the fall season, what do the stadiums look like? That's kind of the next wave.
We're going to get there, I
promise. What we're looking at. So, but this has been, and I've said this publicly a few times, this has just been probably the most fluid situation I've ever worked on. You plan and plan and plan, and then things change. And so we hope that the momentum continues. We hope that obviously the health data continues to come back in a positive way, and we can push forward.
So the SEC release was June 8th, which you referenced a second ago, but that was the day that voluntary workouts could begin because the NCAA put that June 1st date, so you can start bringing guys back and kind of ramping up so that when you hit June 8th, which I guess is a week from Monday, they can actually begin actual activities. Is that am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we'll start off, and ours will be a phased approach. So on June 8th, we will not have all of our student athletes doing voluntary stuff in our buildings, but we will have some. So we'll start with our fall sports, football, volleyball, soccer, cross country. Those are the sports that will start coming in June 1st. The thing about the testing, Richard, is you got to, socially distance there. You've got to, that's a process. You can't just bring in, 100 football players and test them in an hour. It's going to be a process to do that. So it's going to take a day or two to do football. It's going to take a day to do, soccer and volleyball. So we'll continue to do that. But yes, when we start on June 8th, those student athletes will have been tested. They'll be ready to go, and they'll be able to jump in those facilities.
So do you anticipate the entire football team being back on campus on June 8th when the voluntary activities start?
No, we'll have definitely our returners will be here. The incoming freshmen and newcomers, there's a little bit different legislation around kind of the way they can come back. So a lot of them will be not just football, but a lot of our student athletes that are newcomers will be more mid to late June to be ready more for a July 1st date.
So has it been discussed when football practice is actually going to be able to begin? Because we know there's a ramping up period. You've got these voluntary workouts, and coaches have talked about the fact that we've got to get our guys back in shape to be able to go in. But because there was no spring, are we looking at additional time for fall camp than you would have had in previous years?
I think that's really been the mindset all along, is that there would be some relief there so that our coaches could get their hands on the student athletes a little earlier. Right now it's dead until at least through June. We know that there's not going to be any organized practices, those type of things, at least through June. So I think all of our coaches are looking at that July 1st date as maybe that date that they could literally get their hands on them, get out on the field or the court with them, that type of thing. But everything right now will be voluntary through June.
So fast forwarding to football, I've heard some optimism from you. I mean, as we sit here at the end of May, do you anticipate that Ole Miss is playing football in Houston, Texas on Labor Day weekend?
I do, and again, I give Commissioner Sankey a lot of credit, the SEC office and the other ADs in our league. It's been a really great effort and a collaborative effort, over the past 2.5 months. But everybody's remained really optimistic about playing football on Labor Day weekend, and I think we're all planning toward that. I mean, I think that's our goal. We want to play. We want to play in front of fans. all of that. But obviously we're looking at other contingency, plans as well. And so, I think we got to prepare for that, and that's obviously why they're letting us bring our student athletes back. We'll get them back in shape and make sure that they're healthy and ready to go. But then if something happens, if the cases spike, if things start to turn in a different direction, we got to push the season back, then we'll be prepared for that too.
With regard to the game in Houston to start the year, maybe a couple of things here. Number one, we've been alluding on this show for a while that it's probably not going to be played on Saturday, that's going to be a Sunday night kick. There was some reporting a week or so ago, a little more in detail. Can you go on the record about that yet?
I can't go on the record for that, but I would say that probably you could keep discussing that if you want to.
Fair enough.
So, yeah.
What worst kept secret maybe for the opening weekend? Have you had any conversations with the folks at the Texans organization or the kind of the promoters for that game as to whether or not fans are going to be able to attend that? Because that's an NFL venue as opposed to a home stadium for somebody.
Absolutely. Our folks have been talking to them a lot actually about kind of what that's going to look like. I think they're anticipating the same thing. I mean, they're kind of going to work backwards from a full stadium. We've had a lot of fans that have bought tickets. Baylor's had a lot of fans that have bought tickets, and I think right now they're planning to make sure that those folks are in the seats. But again, it's so fluid; it could change tomorrow. I think that really where we're talking about as we get into early July, mid July, I think that's when we'll really have some more data that we'll kind of be able to start making those decisions.
Visiting with Keith Carter, Athletics Director at Ole Miss, on the Farm Bureau phone line. Again, check out favorites.com and go with the home team, Mississippi Farm Bureau. So you almost get like a bonus week in being on the road, and you get 1 week deeper into whatever it is that we're doing, this COVID-19 thing. So September 12th is the first home game. What's it going to look like in terms of fans in the stands? I think that's what everybody wants to know.
Yeah, that's the $1 million. Well, it's actually a lot more than $1 million question. It's a big question. But I think for us, all we can do right now, again, we're going to work backwards from a full stadium. We're going to plan as if we're going to be playing in front of a full crowd. Financially, we've looked at kind of what that looks like if you have a 50% capacity, a 25% capacity, and very candidly, it doesn't look very good.
What are those numbers? I mean, can you share those?
Yeah, I mean, it's in the tens of millions of dollars. I mean, if you're looking at a 50% capacity, you're in the the 8-figure number that we would be at a loss, and you can kind of do the math from there as you go down. So it's one of those things, and I talked to our CFO both here in the department and in the foundation, and it's like you almost say, what am I supposed to do with these numbers? Like we can't operate on this, and I think that would be the case, across the board, not just at Ole Miss or Mississippi State. It'd be the same at Alabama. I mean, if they've got 25% of the people in their stadium, they've got a big problem. And so we're looking at all of that, but just logistically and physically in the stadium, to me, that's more of an easy one. You can go in, you can tape off seats and do different things and have different scenarios. I know we've seen a lot of that modeling across the country of what that would look like. And to be honest, we haven't done a ton of that yet. We've been so focused on getting our student athletes back and making sure that our facilities are ready for them when they come back next week and the week after. So we'll really start diving into what our stadium looks like, what the Grove looks like, just a lot of these things that would involve a weekend here in Oxford for football.
So this is a hypothetical. If I was talking to Greg Sankey, he'd say I don't deal in hypotheticals. I'm hoping you'll take the bait here a little bit. Let's say that you have to go with a 50% capacity, even if it's just for the first few games of the year. How do you determine who gets to be one of the 32,000 in the stadium and who's left outside looking in?
Well, I think you could ask every AD in the SEC, and there's two things that have kind of kept us awake, or we've wrestled with this whole time. One is very serious, and that's the when we finally do get a confirmed case in our department or with one of our teams. How do you handle that? How do you isolate that person? How do you do contact tracing to make sure that really it doesn't shut down the whole operation? And I think that's one of the things we've been talking about from day one, because we know there's going to be a case. We know it's going to happen, whether it's here or Mississippi State or somewhere. So that's been one. The second one is the fans. How do we decide? If we get the mandate that 25% is what you can have in your stadium, how do we decide what that 25% is? And I think we've decided there's really not a good answer, because you're going to make somebody mad. You're going to alienate somebody. no matter what the decision is. So we'll continue to look at that. That's actually something that I think the schools around the league are going to kind of submit and look at some ideas that others are thinking about, and maybe try to find some type of consensus that would make sense. Not that necessarily we'd have to do it at every school, but something that makes sense really across the league.
Because 25% capacity, to use that number, I mean, that's 16,000 people. You've already sold more than 16,000 season tickets, haven't you?
That's exactly right. Yeah, we're about 23,000 right now with the deadline coming up on June 15th. And, before we got on the air, we were talking about Iowa State, and what they've said is basically if you have a season ticket, you're going to be the first priority. And obviously I think that's probably something we would look at too, But like you said, right now we're on a negative side of that, so we'd have to come up with a different plan.
So that is part one of our conversation with Ole Miss Athletics Director. Conversation with Keith Carter as we were talking about what the stadium could look like when Ole Miss opens its home slate on September 12th.
What's going to determine the percentage capacity? You said you're going to start with a full stadium and work back. Is that based on what the governor says you can do? Is it CDC? Is it what the SEC says? Who makes that decision?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of all of those, Richard. I think that, we were talking about this morning on our call that, we're going to have to adhere to state policies, to local policies. Right now it's a 6 feet, social distancing. That's kind of the required amount. So if you went in right now, you'd probably have to figure out, whatever that combination looks like. If it's 6 feet between individual seats, if it's 6 feet between, families or season ticket holders, that type of thing. But, our hope is if you're adding masks, if you're adding different protocols around, does that shrink that social distancing, number? And obviously as you get more information moving forward, I think that's what we're hoping as well, is that as we get more time. The one thing we are still blessed with today is we have time, before September 5th or 6th, before that Labor Day weekend. So hopefully as we get more information, we'll be able to put, a better plan together.
You brought this up a second ago, something I wanted to ask you about. What about the Grove? And I mean, some people might even roll their eyes about that, but it's a big deal. And we were talking about this on the show yesterday. I mean, because I live here, I'm not sure that I look at it the same way that some people do, but for a lot of people, it's a homecoming that happens 6 or 7 Saturdays in the fall. And we know there are a lot of people that show up for that, even for non-conference games. So how does the Grove get managed?
Yeah, it's huge, Richard. I mean, you'll have a full stadium of 64,000. You've still got another 10 or 15 out in the Grove, watching. I mean, it's just such a huge part of what we do here. And, I think for us, when you look at the stadium, that's an easy math problem, depending on what you have to do based on CDC or state guidelines. But you look in the Grove, and, where does the Grove start? Where does it end? Can you put a percentage on it? Probably not. I think some of this, Richard, is going to come down to the fact that we're going to have to do everything we can from a safety standpoint, whether it's in the stadium, whether it's in the Grove. But ultimately, people are going to have to probably make their own decisions, at some point. I don't know that we're going to be able to put a hard and fast number on what the Grove looks like. And so, if we get to the point where, the Grove is going to be open, if we decide it's going to be open, some people, if they're in those age ranges or have a susceptibility to the virus, then maybe they have to decide on their own. So, you get into liability, you get into so many different things when you start talking in those terms. But the Grove is going to be interesting. And, again, that's one of those that we're going to start to spend some more time on. We've kind of had a priority list that we've been working through, but Stadium and Grove are certainly next.
Let me switch gears from football for a minute to baseball. Obviously, this baseball season was disappointing for Ole Miss fans after the start that they had. Knew that you were going to have to get to a point where you figured something out with Mike Bianco's contract going forward. There was some news last week that you guys have either finalized it or are really close to doing so. What can you tell us about that?
Well, you hit it on the head. What a great start to the season. It felt like this team had, kind of that it factor that you talk about. They just had a confidence and a swagger to them. And, I think a lot of it was the personality of the team. There were some characters on this team that just went out there and played baseball. But I think also, Mike kind of let those guys do that. He realized kind of what this team was and what made them really good. And, I thought that was something that Mike did this year that was really good. But, Richard, I think we're in a really good spot with Coach. And, we have been looking at his contract, and I think we're really close to finalizing something that he's going to be really happy with, we're going to be really happy with, and hopefully it's going to keep Coach Bianco here for a long, long time. I think that, there's this talk of, does he get to Omaha enough? Do we succeed enough in the postseason? and all that. And I get that. And we want to do that. And believe me, nobody wants to go to Omaha more than Mike Bianco. He thinks about it every single day. He prepares his teams and his programs to do it every single day. And most years he puts us right on the doorstep of getting there. We all want to get there more. He wants to get there more. But we have a coach that has been so consistent, and he's been so good. 20 years here, never had a single issue with his program. Winning and just doing the right thing and really building and molding young men. So we're excited about his leadership, and we're hoping to make that announcement soon that he's going to be our coach for a long, long time.
And I know, there's a level of just when somebody's been in a place a long time, that there are people that just naturally want change for the sake of change. But kind of when you look at the entire body of work, it gets pretty difficult to justify. And even if you can justify it, there's no guarantee on the backside that you come out achieving what you want to. Do you have to balance that as part of this?
You do. And again, I think, the conversations with Mike have been great. He and I have a really, really good relationship. That's important to me. And we've talked very candidly about, kind of what's out there and what people say, and he gets it. Believe me, he gets it, and he's working hard to get us there. But at the same time, you want a program that's consistent. You want something that every year you're going to have a winner. You're going to be, again, right on that doorstep of doing some really good things, and I have no doubt that he's going to bust through that door in a big way very soon.
There was news, I guess it was last week, about the possibility of pushing the college baseball season back, maybe as much as a month. And we talked with Mike about it on the show, I guess, last Friday. And, he said he wasn't opposed to the idea, maybe wasn't jumping up and down about it the way some of the initial news reports and stories about that were. What do you see in terms of legs for that proposal, kind of from a national perspective?
Well, let me first quantify this, that I don't know a lot about it. I've talked to Coach about it a few times. I do think that it's probably more of a positive situation for the northern schools. I think for them financially, you look at the fact that they have to play 3 or 4 of their first weekends on the road. They're traveling. There's a lot of things there. When we play in late February, it's really cold here. So if you push that back, you probably get a little better baseball weather, which is great. I think on the back end, there's some things you got to consider with summer leagues and different things. For these teams that play all the way into July potentially. There's players on those teams that aren't getting at bats. There's players on those teams that aren't getting, on the mound to pitch, and they need those reps in summer league and those type of things. So there's just a lot of things to think about. I'm kind of like Mike, though, as we've talked about. I'm indifferent right now until I learn more. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I'm not sure it's a great thing for us. I'm not sure it would help us tremendously, but I don't think it would hurt us either. So it's one of those that we'll look at, and you certainly want to involve and try to get better in any way that you can, and maybe this is a way we can.
I understand that right now, because of the uncertainty with budgets, you're not necessarily in a spending mode. It may be more of a saving and preparing for the future mode. But let's talk about spending some money going forward. What's next in particular for the baseball stadium? You've done a couple of renovations that have totaled, about $45 million or so in the last decade. Is there a plan for enhanced seating capacity? Is there a plan for redoing the outfield for the students, for the left field area? What's next in terms of baseball with making more improvements to that stadium?
Well, that's an awesome question. I think that there's some things we definitely need to do. You look out there, and in the past 2 years, we've set season ticket records. We sold 7,200 2 years ago. This year, we were all up around 7,400, and we're kind of finding new seats. We're running out of seats to sell. I think we have a great thing in the outfield right now. I think the folks out in left field love what we have. Obviously, the students love what we have out there. But I think there's some ways we can enhance those. We actually acquired the piece of property behind the student section, the old tennis courts out there. We kind of did a land swap, if you will, with campus, and we've acquired that. So we have that space. We can do some things out there. All capital projects are going to be on a little bit of a hold right now until we figure out where we are with COVID and what all this looks like moving forward. But certainly, I think we just need to enhance what we have out there. We have such a great tradition, such a great atmosphere for college baseball. We don't want to do anything that's going to change that, but I think if we can add more of a good thing, we certainly want to try to do that.
All right, so let's move across campus a little bit to the football stadium. It's no secret that you've got, if you break the stadium into 4 parts, north, south, east, west, you've got 4 different architectural styles going. What's your vision for Vaught Hemingway, and how do you get there?
Well, I think that that's a big dollar question, obviously. I think that
like $100, $200, $300 million question, right?
Yeah, I think what we're going to find, Richard, is we dive into that wholeheartedly and we start looking at more of a kind of a master plan for the stadium. You're going to look at the east side of the stadium coming down to the ground, the west side of the stadium coming down to the ground, potentially. I just think the infrastructure is so old. You look at restrooms and concessions and those type of things. All that's going to have to change when you really dive into it. And so I think it's probably our next capital campaign, honestly.
So basically the south end zone is the only thing that remains?
I don't know if I'd go that far. I mean, and again, I don't know that it's like bulldoze it all the way to the ground, but I just think there's going to be so many things in there that you're not going to be able to kind of put, patch it with chewing gum and duct tape, you know.
That's been done for a long time, hasn't it?
It has. And so I think, as we finish up Forward Together, the campaign that we're in right now, we've got about, 12 or 13 million left to close that out, and we feel like we can get that done. I think probably the next big capital campaign revolves around Vaught Hemingway Stadium. And I think in my tenure as AD, it's going to happen. I think that it's something that we've got to do, and I think that it's something that if we want to continue to show, growth and progress in our football program, that it needs to happen for sure.
So what was the total dollar figure for Forward Together?
$200 million.
200. Mm-hmm.
So $200 million was the Forward Together campaign, and once that's completed, which they said they're about $10 million, Keith said they're about $10, $12 million away from, then maybe you start another one for redoing the football stadium. We'll continue our conversation with Keith Carter. 17, Ole Miss launched actually in 2011, they launched the Forward Together campaign. It was a $200 million fundraiser for athletics. Keith Carter says when the Forward campaign Forward Together campaign officially ends, that's when they'll probably look at starting a new campaign for football stadium, and it's one that will have to cost more than this last one did.
So it's got to be at least that much, if not more, the next time around?
I would think so. I mean, you look at Texas A&M, what they did, and obviously that was a huge project, and they did it and expedited the process, which really kind of added to the budget. But they spent $450 million on their stadium, and it's phenomenal. Obviously, all the bells and whistles, the club areas are
and seats 105,000.
Exactly. So ours wouldn't be quite that big, but I'm thinking, Richard, it's probably at least 200, but it's probably more in the 200 to 300 range is what we'd be looking at in that campaign.
Pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it is. It is.
It's a big number.
It's a big number, and it's one of those things that, now, like you mentioned, as we're kind of looking at our budgets and how we're going to balance budgets, and then you start talking about a $300 million campaign for really one project. It's a big one. But we know how important football is. We understand that, that we got to continue to grow those facilities, and hopefully Coach Kiffin and his staff will help us with some wins on the field that'll get that excitement going.
So in terms of budget, there's been so much talk about the new ESPN deal, which basically is ESPN taking over the 2:30 time slot for CBS. It's been written about it's the most undervalued piece of property in all of sports. A lot of sports business writers have written about what those numbers are going to look like. I know they haven't been formally released, but the expectation is it's going to probably be 5 or 6 times what it is. The impact that has on you from a budget standpoint, if you're talking about an additional 12 or 15 or 18 or $20 million to your budget on top of what you're already getting in TV revenue, what is that going to mean for you when that ultimately happens?
Well, obviously, those for sure numbers haven't come out yet, and that's something that I think.
Yeah, those are my numbers, not yours.
Yeah, Commissioner Sankey and Charlie Hussey and all those guys, they're doing tremendous work on all that, but. If those numbers do happen, Richard, I mean that's big. I mean, for us in a $115 million budget, if you could add, another 20-30% or whatever that looks like, I mean that's big for us. And I think for us specifically here at Ole Miss, having been what we've been through over the past 6 or 7 years, where we had a healthy reserve built up, but we had to go into that when we weren't getting the money from the SEC distribution for the bowl games, and obviously attorney fees with the NCAA case, and now with COVID-19, we just kind of had a lot of layers to some financial things we've had to work through. So to be able to jump into something like that and really kind of be able to go back and pay some debt off and build reserves back and do all those things. I think that's something that would certainly help our budget. It's going to help everyone, but us specifically here at Ole Miss, that's something that's really going to help.
Just a couple more minutes with Keith Carter, athletics director at Ole Miss. Certainly appreciate your time on a Friday afternoon. Name, image, likeness. I guess the letter went today from the 5 power conferences to Congress asking them to act so that the NCAA doesn't necessarily get to set the terms. What's going on with this? And we know that there's a finite timeline for when something has to happen. Otherwise, it turns into chaos with individual states setting forth their own legislation.
No question. And I think that, obviously with everything with COVID-19 going on, that's taken the priority as it should. But there's a huge conversation going on that's really now starting to spark back up. That was kind of quiet there for a couple months with NIL. And, I think that it's something, Richard, that, I don't think the SEC, I don't think Ole Miss is against going down this road. I mean, I think, we understand that we want to give to our student athletes, and some of them are very, high valued and have great marketability. So we don't necessarily have a problem with going down the road. We just want to make sure that we go down the road in the right way. And, it doesn't get into where it's affecting recruiting. It doesn't get into where, the institution itself is having to manage or advise these young people on who they need to sign their sponsorship deal with. There needs to be a governing body that understands it wholly, that is that the NCAA? Is it Congress? Is it a third party that hasn't been established yet? That's all they do is work on this with student athletes and the compliance departments of each institution. But it's a big deal. Roger Wicker obviously is going to be a big part of this as he's on the Commerce Committee, and that's good for us in the state of Mississippi because we have a direct lifeline to him to talk to him about kind of our concerns and where we think this should go. So that's been really good. But, again, I give credit to Greg and William King and everyone at the SEC office. They've done a really, really good job of making sure that we're all collaborating, we're communicating. We as a league are standing together kind of with where we think this should go. And it's going to be big. I mean, and if we're not careful, it's one of those that could change college athletics. It's going to change college athletics. But if we're not careful, I just worry that, our amateur model gets shifted and changed. And I don't think any of us really want that.
There was an interesting article at The Athletic, I don't know if you saw it or not, that kind of outlined, based on a bunch of different projections, what the top 10 earners would have been from last year, from 2019. And Zion Williamson was an anomaly. He was $3.5 million. That's a different deal altogether. But in the top 10 nationally, there were 2 UCLA gymnasts on there because of what they've generated through their own Instagram feeds and the number of followers that they've got there and the value of an Instagram post. Isn't there something that's fascinating that to say, okay, if you're able to generate that type of following, maybe you're not going and you're signing a $100,000 endorsement deal with Nike, but because of your own popularity, you can capitalize on that the way other students can. That feels like it's a step in the right direction, doesn't it?
It does. And again, as I started the last comment, I mean, we're not trying to say it shouldn't happen. We understand, again, a lot of these young people have a marketability, and their image is very valuable. And so we're not saying that they shouldn't get that. We just think there's got to be some guidelines, there's got to be some parameters around it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's great that UCLA gymnasts could have that type of value. I mean, that's really, really cool. And now with social media and just so many different outlets for these young people to get themselves out there and personally brand themselves, they deserve some of this. I mean, there's no question about that. But again, I just think there's got to be a kind of a decisive and defined approach around it, and just making sure, because I could see it, Richard, where it goes down a road that we don't want this to become professional sports.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody has that appetite. I don't think our student athletes, in some ways understand what that would mean. Does that mean that they have to form a union? Does that mean that they all of a sudden have to start paying for their own uniforms? Do they have to pay for their own training? Do they have to, all those things? We don't want to go down that road.
Because one of the arguments I've always made, and I don't know how you feel about this as a former student athlete, not even as an athletics director, is you've got to start with the fact that there is value in a college education. So it's scholarship, and it's room and board, and it's the training and the facilities and the food and all of that goes into it. But then there's a level of marketability that you have, like going out and trying to get a job if you were a college athlete, that other people don't have.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, we've actually, you know, done some research to show, you know, exactly what a college athlete gets during their 4 years at Ole Miss or at Mississippi State or at Alabama, and it's significant. When you talk about, you know, tuition and all the things that go along with their experience, like I mentioned, the training and you know, nutrition and so many different things. But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of always been the model. You know, when I finished in the late 90s, you know, I had kind of a value in some ways because I was an Ole Miss athlete, and you were able to market that a little bit and go out and kind of use that with different connections and those type of things. And I don't think that will change. But I do think that now adding this to that they're going to be able to get something while they're in college. You know, again, I don't think that necessarily there's anything wrong with that. We just got to be careful with the way it's implemented.
Last thing for you. What was your freshman year?
95.
The overall athletics budget at Ole Miss in 1995, probably $30 million.
I think it's less. I think it would be less.
Maybe less than that.
Yeah.
$115 million now. I think the last 4 years it's been over $100 million. How much of a hit does the overall budget take this year based on kind of what's happened in the last few months?
Well, you know, there's been two kind of parallel discussions going on over the past 2 months. One is how do we close this fiscal year, 2020? And we feel good about that. I've kind of been public about that we're going to be able to move some things around and do some things. And then we're building our 2021 budget. And I think when that budget comes out, you'll see that it's going to be less than this budget. You know, I don't know exactly where we'll land yet, but I saw one posted maybe a couple of days ago that they were about $10 million less than last year's budget. It was a Power 5 school. I can't remember who it was. I don't know that ours will be $10 million less, but it'll be less. And so we're going to have to figure that out. And again, you know, we hope this is one of those years that's just an anomaly, and we'll be able to kind of kick back up to where we were in the past. But yeah, it's going to take some tightening of the belt. And I will say this though, Richard, there was some publicity last year when we did our budget that we tightened our belt. You know, we did some budget cuts. We worked with our coaches and different things. And I will say I think that's positioned us a little better for this year's budget because we did some of that last year. And so, you know, we're not having to cut as many things. You know, we're able to still hold on to some of those things that we had in last year's budget. So, but it'll be interesting to see, you know, one of the things we haven't gotten state appropriations from the state of Mississippi yet for the university. So there's just a lot of things. The budgets aren't going to be set here probably for a little while, but it's interesting to see, you know, where we come from this year to next.
Really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Enjoyed it, Richard.
That's Keith Carter, athletics